Alrighty, so in the last video here for the week, let's talk a little bit about some of our shooting modes. So in a lot of your small cameras, your point and shoots and whatnot, you'll have a couple different shooting modes. Usually they're somewhat limited. When you get into your medium cameras, you'll find a more expanded list of shooting modes, and then your SLRs will typically have a pretty expanded list of shooting modes, although some SLRs have a pretty limited one because they're expecting you to basically be using the camera more in a manual mode or a fully automatic mode, and that you can just kind of go from there. It really just depends on the make of the model. So, taking a look at this, particular camera here, you can see at the top there's a dial, and so wherever this little dash line is pointing, you've got this little green thing that's fully automatic. When you go around, you've got manual M. A is aperture priority, where you set the aperture because you're concerned with your depth of field, but the camera is then responsible for figuring out what ISO it should have and what shutter speed. Likewise, S is shutter priority, where you're deciding, okay, I want to stop action, or I want to have, some ability to have something moving. So we've got our shutter priority, and now the camera, you're telling the camera what shutter speed you want. The camera will then figure out the aperture and everything else. We also have what are called P, or programs, where you might have a regular setting you almost always use, and so you can go into program mode and the camera will switch automatically over to one of the things you regularly use. And depending on the make and the model of the camera, you could have 3, 4, 5, 10 programs in there, where then you go into program mode and you have to then come down on this screen and pick program 1, program 2, program 3. Likewise, you've got a couple of other settings, a scene mode, a camera mode for doing video, a couple of, when you go into the scene mode will then bring up some other options, which a lot of your point and shoot cameras have, which they call scene modes also. So flipping over here and looking at some of the other things we have, here's another SLR camera where you've got, again, our auto, and they've got some predefined regularly used scene modes, and then you've got your manual, your aperture priority, and your program, your shutter priority, and your program. Typical scene modes, though, would be, say, a portrait, or a portrait with autofocus. So on this particular screen, you see this little picture and this little picture. This one here, that's usually a portrait mode. And when you see the little bracket around the face, that means it's the camera's got face detection software. It's going to try and autofocus on the face, do a good job. And portrait modes, what they do is the focus becomes a little bit softer so that the person becomes really in focus, and the background kind of fades out a little bit. It kind of messes with your depth of field a little. Likewise, you might see a party or indoor photo mode, usually a little graphic similar to that. What that mode is lower light type settings where you need the flash, but yet the flash is not going to be so overpowering that you take a picture of somebody and they're just kind of completely ghosted out, like you sometimes will see with some of your cheaper kind of point and shoot type cameras, where they'll power down the flash a little bit, maybe try and get the aperture open a little bit, slow down the shutter, where it tries to balance everything so that you still get a nice picture of people in an indoor type lower lighting setting like you would find at a party. Nighttime portrait mode, so what we're looking at here, kind of a little graphic. You're looking at, again, trying to get an image of a person, but when you don't have all the studio lights you would expect in a standard portrait type setting, you're going for a lower light setting. Nightscape, so looking at getting low light, or landscape, looking at getting, your pictures of your mountains, you're outside in the sunlight, and you're trying to show a number of different things that are going on in the background without any motion, without any movement. You're not looking at people, you're just looking at the environment. Panoramic assistance. So some of our cameras will have the ability where you can take a picture and you either pan the camera and it'll take like a big wide photo, or they'll have the thing where you click and then you move your camera and it'll kind of, show you on the screen where you line it up, and then you click and then it shows you on the screen, you line it up, and you can, when you save the picture, it's like one big long panoramic. It doesn't have a lot of use in law enforcement. Some of these other modes we can use, like say a nighttime portrait would be good for taking pictures of people or a crowd at night, like the party one too. It could be taking pictures in a crime scene in the evening. Then we have our nighttime landscape. So again, looking at taking pictures of the stationary objects like buildings and walls and mountains and trees, but in the low light setting. The landscape one is in the sunlight. The nighttime landscape would be in the dark. Beach and snow. You're looking at taking a picture on a sunny day, but you have reflective surfaces around you. So think about, being outside after this fresh snow and it's a semi-sunny day. It's like you're blinded. You have to put on sunglasses even though it's not super sunny because the snow is reflecting that extra sunlight at you. Same with being out on the beach, Even if it's not super sunny day, it sometimes feels brighter at the beach because the sun is reflecting off that light surface. So from a CSI standpoint, you're out on a bright sunny day and you've got, lots of sidewalk or you've got cars and windshields around you. You might use that mode to help you out. Sunset and our dusk dawn modes. These are modes where our lighting is not too diminished, but we're getting a diminishing light source. And, sunset, the sun's starting to come up, so we're starting to increase our light. Dusk, the sun is going down, and so our light is slowly decreasing for us, and the camera is tracking that increase and decrease in the light. The other thing that happens at sunset and at sundown is where we end up having light in the sky, and the sky gets kind of reddish orange with clouds. So what we're looking at here is trying to get those beautiful extra color saturations to happen. Not a lot of use in our CSI. We don't worry about that. Fireworks show, kind of a cool one. Keeps the aperture open for a little bit longer, keeps the shutter open for a little bit longer. And this way, this is when you get those pictures of fireworks and you got those streaks of light coming down because, the fireworks takes a second or two for it to burn. And so it gets you some pretty pictures. Not really useful in our CSI stuff on a regular basis, but I actually will show you something later this semester where we will use fireworks mode to help us take pictures in low light settings, especially in a nighttime car crash setting. Backlight. So if you've ever taken a picture of somebody where it's like, oh, let's stand here by the window, and you take the picture and then you look at it and all the people are as a shadow and you can see everything outside that window. It's because they're backlit. You have more light coming from behind the person than you have coming at the person. And so with all the light coming over their shoulders, you don't illuminate their face, their camera can't see the face. So they're backlit. So if you have a black backlighting mode on your camera, then that tells the camera we got to fire the flash, even though it's really bright in here because we're looking out a window, we got to fire the flash. We got to change the aperture so that we're losing our depth of field, so we're not focusing on things in the background out the window like trees, that we're focusing on the people or focusing on what's in this room. Flower mode or close-up mode, and you'll see, a lot of your SLRs, that's a popular one too, that you got the flower mode up here on the turn dial. Cameras, naturally, the autofocus really does not work very well closer than like 2 to 3 feet. If you start getting too close, so if I start getting too close to the camera, it can't focus on what it's trying to see. So what we end up having to do is we have to tell the camera, what, we're closer to the object than you're used to being. And so when you put it in close-up mode, the camera then changes how it evaluates stuff in the autofocus setting and will allow you to focus in even closer. Still, usually, though, you can't get your camera physically closer than 1 foot to the object. The other thing that happens in close-up mode is when you start dealing with like the flash, you look at where the flash is on a camera. The lens is here and the flash is usually here or here. Well, when you're super in close to an object, my lens is here, but my flash is up here. So when my flash goes off, well, you can't see the flash. And so the flash is useless. So now it's got to change its shutter speed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Museum mode is one where we disable the flash and we try to get more light into the scene because a lot of museums don't like flash photography around their documents, pictures and statues, because light can degrade paint. And so they're trying to protect the paints of what's in the museum. So museum mode does that. One that a lot of officers fail to use but is very useful to us is copy mode. Yeah, you see a little icon here, a picture. So if I've got like a note, if I've got a suicide note at a scene, I want to get a picture of that note. We're going to collect the note as evidence, yes, but I want a picture of that note. So if I put my camera in copy mode, what I can do is I can actually line it up and again, it changes the autofocus for what it's focusing on. And it's not looking for shapes and objects, it's looking at the writing. And so you can copy a document. It's not perfect. a flatbed scanner copying or a photocopier is always better, but at the crime scene, taking a picture of a document in copy mode actually gives you really good results. And then finally, action mode or sports mode. This is a mode where, people are running, and so you want that shutter speed to be super high so that you can get that picture of the quarterback throwing the ball, and you get them mid-throw, and it's not like their arm is this big blurry thing that you're just locking them in, That is one, again, where you're looking for that high shutter speed. And, from a law enforcement, criminal justice standpoint, crime scene standpoint, we don't have a lot of use for the sports mode, but, if you're snagging photos and there's traffic and there's cars driving by, sometimes if you're trying to do surveillance and you're trying to get license plate numbers, that is the mode that's going to help you. All right, so we've talked about, the how the cameras work as it relates to, that balancing act of your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO settings. We've talked a little bit about, what cameras are good for which jobs as it relates to, what camera should you be buying. Really, in a perfect world, we would like those SLRs for our crime scene work. The medium-sized cameras do work, but, there's times where you think about it, you just need a camera for officers to have in their squad car. Yeah, point and shoot's perfect just because we'll want them to take a picture. And don't feel it. I'm not telling you to buy a camera for this class either. This lecture is not meant to be like, oh no, I need to go out and buy a camera this weekend. No. That's not what we're saying. We're just talking about the differences when and if you are ever thinking about buying a camera. Otherwise, we've got all those settings, which settings you can use as you're going through this semester, doing some of the photo projects. Try some of those different settings out. Try some of those different scene modes out. You'll find that they will help you in collecting images, especially when you're talking about low light settings or close-up settings and whatnot. As always, if you have any questions, stop out and see me at the Public Safety Training Center, shoot me an email, or give me a phone call. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.